the suicide in an essay as a test, and we had to write a hero myth and have it set in one of the places we'd studied that year in the humanities. And I set it at Oakwood, but I brought a red pen, a blue pen, a black pen, and a pencil. And I started to write this story in the different colors, where each color connected to a different voice in his head. And it all kind of built into a sort of a montage that culminated. But the first line of the story was in red, and it was, I carefully and intricately began cutting myself into several pieces. It's really a suicide fantasy of a child, of a young boy who's trying to contend with pain and difficulty in school. But it's also, obviously, this massive metaphor for filmmaking and editing. The creative process is not just sunshine and roses. You're working with all kinds of feelings that you need to feel a connection to the darker side of yourself. And I think that's part of what was behind the suicide. We made the film. It took us 2 years to make it. By the time we finished all the sound work that we'd done, it's a longer story than we have time for, but it got pretty crazy. We ended up mixing the movie in 35 millimeter, even though we shot the movie in Super 8. It was an amazing experience, and it sort of set in motion, my ambitions to make more movies. It was a sort of navigation of childhood memories, fantasies, like literally that dream sequence at the end of Dottie culminates in a sort of wild montage, which was basically a sort of orgasm. I had a spanking dream when I was 4, was clearly a sexual dream. I was getting spanked by my uncle, who was like the strongest man in the kingdom. And there was an erotic component to it, I know. And when I remember the dream, my grandmother did art, and so she had all those anatomy books around her studio. And I literally saw a wild montage of all those anatomy imagery that you see in Dottie Gets Spanked. So it comes from stuff that's childhood, early memories, but it combines with a lot of interesting ideas and thinking that compelled me to look at spanking. I wasn't worried about it, and I also wasn't particularly interested in how it brought additional attention to the film. I wanted people to talk about, ideally, the film itself and not the controversy. But what it did do is it exposed exactly what the film is about. And so it replicated a contentious society that was there to single out people who are different and make them the other, the outsider, the problem that would have to be overcome for us to get through the AIDS epidemic, because that became an opportunity to penalize and victimize people who are already subjugated by the society. This idea of toxicity, of poison, of environmental problems, of social poisoning, that we're all sort of poisoned by society. But the thing that was also so useful, I guess, or so remarkable about Genet, who was such an important reference in Poison, was that he talked about that we all have poisons inside ourselves too. And so poisons are not simply imposed upon us. We also have poisonous feelings. We poison ourselves. There's poison the way we recoil at all of our excrement and spit and urine and pus and the things that the body produces that we immediately say, ugh, that's not part of me. That's disgusting. That is such a remarkable contradiction because it is part of us. It's hard to probably put them all into the same category because I see all the differences from story to story, and they're not all necessarily powerful women. They also are vulnerable, and they are also passive. They're made smaller by the conditions that they confront. They don't really solve the problems that they're faced with. This is at least true for films like Safe and films like Far From Heaven. Julianne's as a through line to so many films that I've made, I find to be just the most perfect example. This is somebody who's worked with amazing actors of all stripes, but something about her understanding of the lens of the camera and how much it reads on the face and how much you can hold back and allow the viewer to enter and to do their work in filling in the gaps. And that's where the real emotional experience comes from and what the viewer is doing. And you have to let the viewer have space to do it. Give them tools and sometimes pull the tool away so that they have to lean in further. And something about what Julianne, God knows intellectually and intuitively as an actor, that was evident from the very beginning. What I love about these artists, Dylan and Bowie in particular, is that they allow the music and their celebrity and their creativity to keep opening up questions about self and identity and keep confusing us in the most exciting way, particularly with the glam rock era, which sort of allowed young audiences and young people to feel okay about not knowing who they were and be figuring out who they were and changing and redressing who they are and dressing up one way and dressing up another way. And that instability, that sense of radical instability being actually the norm, not the exception or not the bad choice, is what those artists kept doing. And for Dylan, he did it out of a sort of personal necessity to keep making art. And it would frustrate the hell out of his fans when he plugged in electric and was no longer the folk singer and no longer the protest singer. And then he swung even further and became a born-again Christian. You're completely confused by who he is and what he believes. And in a way, that means he's alive. The cells, the old cells are dying off and new cells are replacing them. And it's a constant mutation process. And he made that the through line of his creative life.